These few Torah portions, namely last week and this week, last week was Parashat Ve'eshev, this week Parashat Miketz, are known to be the Torah portions, the Parashiot of dreamers and dreams. And that's because, as we're soon going to count, there's no less than 8 dreams which take place between last week's Torah portion and this week's Torah portion. And we're going to name them. And it's obviously no coincidence. The number 8 has to do with this week, being that Chanukah is this week. And we know there are 8 days of Chanukah. So let's go through these 8 dreams just to give us a recap and a good overlook of the Torah portions. So when we delve into namely 2 of them, the 2 last ones, we're going to really understand what the Torah wants us to learn from these dreams. The first dream, last week's Torah portion, is by Joseph. Joseph has a very interesting dream. He has a dream of him in the middle and stalks around, alluding to him and his brothers, and all the stalks bowing down. That's dream number 1. Dream number 2, again, is from Joseph. Joseph dreams that the stars and the sun and the moon are all bowing down towards him, again alluding to his brothers and his parents bowing down to him. And obviously we know that the brothers were very jealous and very not happy about those dreams. Those are the first 2 dreams. The next dreams are at the end of last week's Torah portion. 2 by the butler and 2 by the baker. What were the dreams? So just to understand, the butler and the baker both committed a crime at their level to Paro, and Paro threw them into jail. That jail happened to be the same jail that Joseph found himself in, as we'll explain in a moment. This was in a aristocrat's servant's jail, meaning when the people did something wrong, when the slaves and the servants committed a crime, they found themselves in this specific jail. Joseph, being a servant of an aristocrat, Potiphar, he found himself in this elitist jail. And the butler and the baker were also working for an aristocrat, namely the ruler of Egypt, Paro, and they found themselves in the same jail, same dungeon. So the butler has the first dream. The butler has a dream of a vine with 3 trendles. That's the fancy word. A vine with 3 trendles, 3 things sprouting out of it, 3 clusters if you want to say. And he was squeezing them into Paro's cup. That was his first dream. The baker also had a dream. The baker had a dream that he had 3 baskets filled with baked goods on top of his head, and there were birds eating from the food, from the baked goods. At the same time, our commentaries bring down from the Midrash, Rashi also brings it down, that the butler dreamt the interpretation of the baker's dream, and the baker dreamt the interpretation of the butler's dream. So the butler also, not only did he have his dream, but he had the interpretation of the butler. So the butler was going to be saved in the next 3 days. He was going to be taken out by Paro. So that was the second dream the baker had. The butler had the interpretation to the dream of the baker as well, that in 3 days he will be brought to Paro and killed. And that's what promoted the baker to also want an interpretation to his dream. The butler says his dream. Joseph gives a beautiful interpretation. In 3 days you're being saved from this place. So the baker's like, wow, that's a positive interpretation. And not only is it positive, but it's got to be true because I dreamt that. So then he says, okay, this is my dream. 3 baskets, birds eating from it. He's looking for something positive. Joseph tells him something negative. You know, in 3 days from now, Paro's going to sentence you to death. He was not happy. But the butler didn't contest because the butler dreamt that about his buddy, about his friend, the baker. So again, that was 2 dreams by Joseph, that was 2 dreams by the butler, and 2 dreams by the baker. We're up to 6 in last week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion opens up with another 2 dreams. And these dreams were dreamt by none other than Paro himself. Paro's first dream, as we all know, he's standing by the Nile River, which to them, they alluded to the Nile as a god. It was their life source and they worshipped it. And he's standing there and emerges from the Nile 7 fatty, large, strong cows. And after them come out 7 scrawny, thin, skeleton cows, and they devour the 7 fatty ones. Wakes up from this horrible nightmare, goes back to sleep, and he has another nightmare. And again, he sees 7 sprouts of grain that look fatty and strong and beautiful and tasty even. And then 7 dwindling ones, devoured ones, horrible ones, come and eat that big, beautiful one. And again, he wakes up and he doesn't know what to do with himself. So all day long, he's asking for interpretations. And the wise men and his advisors are coming and telling him a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and he was just not satisfied by anything. Many of the commentaries say, oh, Paro, you're going to have 7 girls, and then they're all going to die. That was a lot of his advisors were saying, and they all said, he didn't accept that. He didn't think that that's what the dream meant. As a ruler, he didn't think something personal he would dream about, rather something more national. So these are the 7 dreams. These are the 8 dreams. 2 by Joseph, 2 by the butler, 2 by the baker, and then the final 2 by Paro. The Zera Shimshon quotes a sefer, ironically a similar name, the Zera Berech, who asks the following question, or the following 2 questions. Number 1, why would the Torah, or take a step back, why would God send a message to Paro about plenty and famine that is going to come through the imagery of cows? He understands the second interpretation of grain. Well, yeah, grain is something which sustains. That's the produce, the source. But cows? He's asking, why cows? Second answer is, he says, why the need for 2 dreams? Just repeat the same dream. Our commentary said, well, Paro had 2 dreams because, as Joseph himself says, it was going to happen very fast. The 7 years were starting right away, and the 7 years are going to follow of famine right after that. So that's why the repetition of the dream. But let the dream be the same. Let it be the grains, the seven pronged grain being eaten, and then having that twice over. Why would there have to be 1 of cow and then 1 of the grain? These are his 2 questions. So why a cow? And then why 2 different dreams? So the Zera Shimshon quotes the Zera Berech's answer, and he says as follows. Guess what day of the year this was taking place? Any day in the whole Jewish calendar, 365 days. This happened none other than Rosh Hashanah. The Talmud tells us that Joseph was taken out of jail after a long 12 years of being in jail on Rosh Hashanah. And the same way that Joseph came out of jail on Rosh Hashanah and he was brought up to greatness, so too Rosh Hashanah is a special day to each and every Jew, each and every descendant, to break out of their own hurdles and struggles and rise to greatness. What do we do on Rosh Hashanah? What is the mitzvah, the icon of the day? The blowing of the shofar. Right? It's something we all come to the synagogue to listen to. Does a cow, or better yet, an ox, have horns? Oh, yes, they do. But those horns are not kosher to blow as a shofar. That's a horn opposed to a ram's horns. There's a different language, different terminology, obviously, in Hebrew. Or maybe you'd like to call them more of a trumpet. And the kosher type of horn that we blow is something which is bent. The cow or the ox's horn is something which is straight and is non-valid, not permissible, or it's not kosher. We don't fulfill our mitzvah if we would blow with that keren, with that type of horn. What does a cow represent? A cow actually represents Egypt. Egypt, amongst all other things that they did, was they also worshipped their cattle. They worshipped the Nile, they worshipped the cattle, they worshipped Paro. And what God was showing Paro is that his strength, his rise, he was the powerhouse of the world at that time, and Egypt being that dominant country, was coming to an end. There was going to be its last 7 years of power, 7 years of flourishing and being successful, and then it was going to go and be the end of it right then and there. And this was all happening on Rosh Hashanah. If Joseph came out of the jail on Rosh Hashanah, when did Paro have the dream? The night before, which is also Rosh Hashanah. So Paro dreamt this on Rosh Hashanah. Joseph came out on Rosh Hashanah. He gave the interpretation. The deeper meaning of this interpretation and why God alluded to a cow, or through 7 cows and then 7 more cows to Paro, was to show him that your time as ruler and dominion in the world is coming to an end in 7 years from now. And when the Egyptian power would go down, that's when the Jewish power would rise. There's this concept, and we read about it just a few weeks ago, of Esav and Yaakov, twin brothers. And along our history, there's always this, as we say in Hebrew, zeh leumat zeh, tit for tat, or maybe this or that, we'll put it that way. That when Bnei Israel is on top and suppressing, well, then we're the successful ones. But if not, it's like a seesaw. If not, the Goyim are on top and they're suppressing, and we're unfortunately the underdog at that time. So the Torah and God was alluding to and telling Paro this message, that this fat cow, we like to call it, this cash cow of Egypt, is now having its last 7 years of milking, and then it will be done. And that's how the Zera Berich answers why Paro had a vision and a dream of a cow. Now the Zera Shimshon continues and says, I want to give another answer, and I want to answer the second question as well, as why the need for 2 dreams. He says, based on a verse that King Solomon writes in Mishle, in Proverbs. He writes, and I'll quote to you, it's in chapter 14, verse 4, Verav tevuot bekoach shor. And that is that the strength of the harvest is based on the power of the ox which plows it. The stronger an ox plows the ground, the greater the harvest will take. The deeper, the stronger, the more powerful. The Talmud goes on to say, there are 2 things which can bring to the spoiling of produce, of the harvest. Number 1, the lack of power and strength of the ox which plows. And number 2, even anything that comes afterwards, no matter how good or bad the plowing was done, the harvest could always rot afterwards if it's not taken care of. There could be bugs, there could be so many different things, weather conditions, which ruin the produce. What was Paro being shown by God? He was being shown by God that both items, both ingredients of the success of the produce are going to be attacked and you have no way out of this famine. You're going to have 7 years of plenty. But after that, firstly, the ox and cows which plow the ground, they're going to have no power. And even if anything sprouts or grows from there, it's going to be spoiled afterwards and there's going to be a complete famine. So that's the way the Zera Shimshon answers. Why cows? Well, we just explained. They're the ones who have the power or the need for their power when they plow. And then why the second one, which is different, that has to do with the grain, because even if the cows won't be able to plow well, the grain that comes out will also not come out in a strong and healthy way. All of this to show us that Paro was seeking advice and an interpretation for his dreams, and no one was able to provide it until the butler comes along and he says, "Today I recount my sins. Today I recount that some time ago I served you a cup of wine and there was a fly in it. And I was sentenced to the dungeon. In the dungeon there was a very special man, this Jew boy, Joseph, was a lad. He interprets dreams. Let's bring him out." And so Joseph comes and he tells him the interpretation. The 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And then he goes on and he says the whole way, "This is not my interpretation, this is God's interpretation. God is showing you what's going to happen to your country as its leader." And Paro comes up with the idea and says, "You, my dear friend, are the one who's going to save us from this. You have God who helped you with this and opened this key to understanding and interpreting it. You are going to be the one who takes us." So, in our own lives, sometimes more often than not, depending on how tired we are, depending on how underworked or overworked we are, we all have dreams. And sometimes we remember the dreams, sometimes we don't remember the dreams, but we do have dreams. And what do those dreams mean to us? The Talmud says that nowadays we should not take dreams too seriously for the reason that anything we think about during the day, it's normal to dream about it at night. So if a person is in the jewelry business and all day long, or better yet, if a woman's husband is in the jewelry business and she has a dream of her husband coming home with diamond earrings or a tennis bracelet or a pendant, it doesn't mean much because it's on her mind. It's something which doesn't mean too much because the Talmud says whatever you think about during the day, if you dream about it at night, it doesn't mean too much or anything at all. But the question is when a person does have a dream, they have a dream about something which they weren't thinking about necessarily that day or recently. What does that mean? Talmud tells us, be very careful on who you tell your dreams to, because we learned from Joseph, based on the interpretation, the truth will come and be. The Talmud says, don't tell too many people your dreams. And if you're going to tell someone your dreams, tell it to someone who you love. Or better yet, tell it to someone who loves you and will interpret it for the good. There's a tradition to say, Chalom Tov, Chalom Shalom, 3 times before you say your dream over to someone else. It's a good dream and it's a peaceful dream. You say it, some have the interpretation, some have the tradition that you say it when you're about to say it. Others have the interpretation, the listener says it 3 times before they listen to whoever's telling them a dream. Because again, a dream that might have some importance from God is all based on the interpreter, on the way it's going to be interpreted. So, to the most part, I don't know of any prophets nowadays. Certainly don't claim to be one. But most of the dreams that we have nowadays are all things that we've thought about during the day. And we shouldn't get so hung up over it. On the contrary, whenever I am brought with questions of dreams, if I could always spin it for some type of ethical growth or moral support, spin it that way, it doesn't hurt. But any gloomy or hard or scary dreams, we shouldn't take to heart, because it could be something that we just thought about, and we should not let our morale get down over it. Rather, either keep it to yourself, or if you need to vent it to someone who you love, and hope that they spin it for the good. So either it won't mean too much, or it only means something positive. That's a very strong message we learned from these 2 weeks of dreams, the 6 of last week and the 2 from this week. It's also good to be a dreamer. It's also good to have great aspirations and motivations in our lives in that aspect. But while we're sedated and the dreams that come to us in that way, we shouldn't hold on to them too much. We shouldn't let them bring us down. On the contrary, my view is, if it's something negative, dismiss it. If it's something which could be spin for the positive, for personal growth, for an inspirational growth, on the contrary, use it for the good and use it for that growth.